This is the Tachyon Pulse, and today we're going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Is it actually within the Prime Universe, or is it a totally different timeline on its own? Let's get stuck into it.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.
Okay, so we've been discussing this for a while. Is Star Trek Strange New Worlds and Discovery a completely different timeline, a completely different universe to TNG, Voyager, DS9, etc.? And a different universe even to the Kelvin universe. But the latest episode of Star Trek, Season 3, Episode 2, for me, just confirms it again. But before we talk about that, let's just talk about what previously has happened that makes us wonder if this is again a different timeline. Now, first of all, I'm going to say it's not the Kelvin timeline because the Enterprise is too small. It's gone back to the size that it should be. In the Kelvin timeline, it's bloody enormous. So we can, I think, ignore that for now. It's a different timeline from the original series, etc., though, for a few reasons. One, the Gorn. They shouldn't know who they are. And there's now having this massive conflict with the Gorn that's never been mentioned before. And somehow they're going to have to get to a point where the Gorn become part of the Federation. I don't see how. But let's see if in Season 3 they give us some sort of explanation for how these monsters that they've turned them into could actually then become part of the Federation. And we know they are, because in a couple of the movies we see the Federation Council and there's a Gorn sat there. So how they're going to figure that out, I don't know. But as I say, they're not supposed to know who the Gorn are. So that's a massive change basically in the timeline. The Klingons is also a massive change. They shouldn't look like that. They look more like the Kelvin timeline Klingons than they do our Klingons, the Klingons we know from TNG, etc. That actually made me wonder, is this actually the Kelvin timeline playing out? Because the events that triggered the Kelvin timeline were just before this, the events in Strange New Worlds. So, could maybe, but as I said, the Enterprise has returned to its normal size, so I don't think so. But the Klingons in Season 1 of Discovery were massively different, and actually Lower Decks kind of proved to us that it's a different timeline within this universe when they did their little shot of the Klingons changing, and it when there's multiverse thing going over the top of each other, and it changed from the Klingons we know into the Klingons we see in Discovery. Kind of proved it. Khan, they've changed. They've edited the timeline for that, and then said that it's just to fit in more with the realism of Star Trek, because we are supposed to have had World War III now. We haven't. We're supposed to have had the Eugenics War, but we haven't. In reality, I mean. So we've changed the timeline so that it fits more realistically with the suspension of disbelief. I don't get that. It is still a TV show. They didn't need to do that. But it does show to me the attitude of the creators here, that they don't really care about canon and they'll just change it if they want to, if they think it makes sense. There is an argument to say canon is fluid. And I would say, yeah, okay, they can change certain things. It's a new show. It's a new view of looking at things. But I think there are things that are sort of set in stone. And if you have constant changes in canon, at some point you have to say, well, this is just wrong. It doesn't fit what we've seen before, so it must be a different timeline. There's also an argument to say, look, events in Enterprise maybe change things, but that's not normally Star Trek do with timey-wimey things. They'd have, well, basically, look, there's two ways you can look at time travel. Either you go back in time and change something, but then all of a sudden that change actually kind of always happened because it's back in time and there's one timeline. So you can't actually go back and change anything major. Or you've got the timeline where you go back in time, but that creates a new timeline by the fact you've gone back in time, and any changes you create change everything in the future. Star Trek have kind of done it both ways at times. So I don't really know. But J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, showed us that if you go back in time and change something, it creates a totally new different timeline. So that must be what we go with. So you can't say that this is the same timeline as the original series, etc., if you think that events in Enterprise or something else created the changes that we're seeing now. But there are two things in Strange New Worlds Episode 2, though, that really make me think this is a completely different universe, and it's basically Kurtzman's universe. One is Starbase One. Now, we've seen this Starbase before in Strange New Worlds, and they've created, I think it was actually Discovery we saw it for the first time, but they've created a whole background for it, a back history. They've basically said that this starbase, which is enormous, was built during World War III. And the reason why it's got those biodomes with mountains and stuff in is because they were trying to protect certain parts of the Earth's natural history and nature and plants, etc., etc. They're basically Kew Gardens, but enormous. I've always questioned that history because, for one, during a world war, they really stopped to build an enormous starbase, and I'm not sure they're supposed to have that capability because it's supposed to be in the near future sort of thing, not in the distant future. So how on earth they did it, don't know. Also, it's supposed to be the oldest starbase, and it's been moved a few times. So it was out in the Orca belt, or out 100 AU from the sun at one point. Now it's then at Jupiter, and then it was at Earth. So yeah, it's got some good engines on it. We actually saw in Discovery, though, that then the Starbase One that we know, that's often called just Spaceport, was actually under construction in the background. But my point is, we never saw this Starbase One before, ever. Except we saw something very similar once in Star Trek Beyond, where we see the Yorktown Starbase. That, in lots of ways, is a very similar idea to that of Starbase One in Strange New Worlds. I think that's Kurtzman's influence. I think Kurtzman has gone, I like this idea that I wrote in this movie and I want to put it in this show. We'd never seen it in the original series or TNG or anything like that. We'd never seen a starbase anything like Starbase One, even though we're now saying that actually there's a few of them. I find that frustrating. And again, it just seems to me that this is a different timeline, and they're now retrospectively creating histories to explain what things they've just decided to do. And again, I find that frustrating. I think that really just shows that these people don't really care about canon, and then only when fans point things out do they go, no, well, okay, we better retrospectively think how to fix this. And to be honest, the only way to explain it is if this isn't the Prime Universe anymore. But the biggest thing for me that proves that this isn't the Prime Universe is that Episode 2 of Season 3 completely rewrites and remakes the Squire of Gothos episode, or Gothos episode. In that episode, we meet Trelane in the original series, and he is a trickster. His powers are technology-based, according to what we see, even though that might have been a trick. And we see his parents come at the end and tell him, you've been a very naughty boy, and you must come home. And he basically, that's how they win the events of the episode. The thing is, it was a complete remake, because that's exactly how the Episode 2 ended, with voiced by John Delancey, amazingly. Q's parents, Trelane's parents, turn up and say you've been a very naughty boy. It does underline and explain a lot about the Q. It explains they had a home world once, which is interesting. But the fact that they've remade an episode of the original series, and the fact that Spock didn't recognise him, should have recognised Trelane really, or at least recognised his powers, for me just underlines that this isn't the same universe. Things like Kirk turning up constantly. He's not supposed to know Pike. They're supposed to have met once when Pike becomes Fleet Commander, I think he said, in the original series episode. He's not supposed to know him, but he turns up all the time. It's weird. Spock should have recognised Q. Doesn't in the original series. Weird. Spock is a completely different character in this season than we see in the original series. Weird. Okay, you can argue that canon's fluid, that there might have been some timey-wimey stuff, but with all of this constant flood of just mistakes within canon, the only explanation for me now is that it's not Prime Universe. It's not anything to do with the TNG or the original series, which I actually think they're planning, if they get a new contract, to remake anyway. No, this is a different universe. And that's the only way to explain all of these changes. How do I feel about it? I just want them to make Prime Universe. I just want them to make the Star Trek that I fell in love with. They don't seem able. But guys, get into the comments on what you think. Are my points... But guys, get into the comments on what you think. Is this a different timeline? Is it a different universe? Is it the Kelvin timeline just with a more sensible Star Trek Enterprise? Get into the comments and tell me exactly what you think. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification. It really helps us out and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, you can become a member of the channel and get to see a lot of these videos before everybody else. Go check that out. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
Our tachyon pulse has been unable to completely penetrate the anomaly.